Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Before we get started, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and you can even join my Patreon. We have a big goal there. I will talk about that at the end of the video, but I need your help in promoting the channel, sharing it with the people around you. It's been really slow the last 6 weeks or so, and I've got to make some decisions. Sharing the channel is so helpful, and thank you so much for those of you that already do it. Come with me back to 2008. The Dark Knight is killing it at the box office. People are wearing apple-bottom jeans. People are saying they'll never give up their BlackBerry for the new iPhone. And one of the top TV shows is Wife Swap. Wife Swap was a semi-reality show where two separate households of families who lived different lifestyles would swap matriarchs for 2 weeks. For example, the wife and mother from a very religious household would go and live with the family of an atheist who raised her kids without a belief in God. And then the godless mother would go and live with the religious family, for example. I confess I never watched the show, but I knew of it. It started in 2004 and lasted for 7 seasons and featured episodes like a hardworking blue-collar mom goes to live with a millionaire, a gun-toting mother goes to live with an animal rights activist family, so on and so on. But years after the show would come to an end, we'd be reminded of it when news spread about a horrific tragedy and crime involving one of the families that had been featured on the show years ago. This is the story of the wife swap murder. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. April 23rd, 2008. ABC airs an episode of Wife Swap titled The Stockdale-Tonkovic Families. The Stockdale family was from Ohio and the Tonkovic family was from Illinois. The Tonkovic family is made up of Laurie, her husband John, and their children, T-Vic and Megan. This family is very laid back, easygoing, and their philosophy is basically, you only have one life to live, so enjoy every single minute of it. Laurie, the mother, is seen on the show dancing with her children, picking up burgers for dinner, and handing out cash to the kids pretty much whenever they ask for it. As you can imagine, the Stockdale family is the complete opposite. That's the premise of the show. The Stockdale family is made up of Kathy, her husband Timothy, and their sons Calvin, Charles, Jacob, and James. The Stockdale family's free time revolves around the group musical endeavor, which is a wholesome family bluegrass band. The family is very religious, and Kathy and Timothy are, I think the word extreme is fair in this case. The boys are very sheltered. They are not allowed to watch television or play video games, and they have to do things like chores in order to have privileges like listening to a few songs on the radio. The Stockdales are very much about controlling everything their boys see and hear and do, how they spend their time, and what they consume as far as media is concerned. Kathy especially despises things like curse words and girls. She despises dating for the kids, and the boys are not allowed to spend any time with girls, even though some of them are in their late teens. Kathy talks about how she is worried about teenage pregnancy and states that she is not going to let girls ruin her boys' character. Oof. It's not the girl's responsibility, it's the boy. This is Kathy packing to go and live with the Tonkovic family. She's showing off a jar of beef broth that she's taking with her. For what, Kathy? That's not enough soup for even 2 people. I don't know why she's packing beef broth. I just thought that was a little bit strange. Kathy and Timothy seem to be living in a different era and even state that they moved their family from the city to the country in order to isolate the children. Now, that sounds pretty culty to me. When you want to control someone to the point that they have to be isolated, in my opinion, that is a problem. And I share my opinions here because some of you like it, and this is not a news channel. The two families sign up to participate in the reality show / social experiment, and as you would expect, it doesn't go well. There's lots and lots of drama. Laurie actually ends up getting really emotional and sad as she talks with the Stockdale boys, and I can see why. The boys basically have every minute of their day scheduled. They really have no free time, and they're not allowed to just play and be boys. The only time they do anything that would even be considered maybe fun is when they're rehearsing and performing with the family bluegrass band. Kathy manages the band, she manages the money, and the boys are given a little cut of what the band makes from performances. Now, the premise of the show is that for 1 week, the woman in the new household follows the house rules. She lives with the family as the family lives. But in week 2, it flip-flops, and the family then has to live by the woman's rules, by the way she runs her own household back at home. There are immediate problems in the Tonkovic house because John feels that Kathy is insulting his family by calling his adult kids that live at home moochers and losers, and he gets quite angry. Kathy tries to implement a chore chart with the free-living Tonkovics who don't usually even get out of bed until afternoon, and that goes over like a lead balloon. Meanwhile, Laurie sits the 2 oldest Stockdale boys down at this picnic table and begs them to go on a date. I can't show you the footage because it's copyrighted, but at first the boys resist strongly. They're on the verge of getting angry. They claim they are not comfortable going out on a Friday night, let alone where girls are going to be present. Oh my God. Laurie is able to talk the boys into trying it. And then Timothy gets very angry with Laurie, but she puts her foot down and she tells Tim, this is happening. The boys are going out on the town on Friday. They're going to hang out with kids their own age, and there's going to be girls there. Laurie also lets the boys watch TV and play video games, and they admit they really enjoy it and they think it's fun. But then they say, we aren't accomplishing anything. Look, there is nothing wrong with a good work ethic. And I'm going to be honest with you. My kids were really into Zelda, and they would sit and play with my husband. He liked Zelda too. That was like the video game back in the day. But it was like 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm like, up and at 'em, let's get moving. And now I hear that kids sit in their rooms and play video games for like 8 hours a day. And I guess I'm old and old-fashioned, but no, that's a no for me. Anyway, the episode is, from my perspective, a bit disturbing. I find parents who treat their children as chattel, as property, like Laurie says, as slaves, I find that disturbing. And that's without taking into account what happens years later when tragedy strikes. June 15th, 2017. A call comes into dispatch at the Beach City, Ohio 911 center. The caller immediately hangs up, which triggers an automatic response from the police. The call has come from inside the Stockdale home, and as officers pull up to the house, they hear a single gunshot coming from inside. Cops then enter the home, and there they find a massacre. 25-year-old Jacob Stockdale, who was 15 at the time the wife swap episode was filmed, is bleeding from a gunshot wound to the head. He is lying on the floor, but he is alive. Emergency services is called to render immediate medical attention to Jacob. Police continue into the Stockdale home and find Catherine Stockdale, Kathy, the mother, who was 54 at the time, dead on the floor. She has been shot and killed. Then they find 21-year-old James Stockdale, who was only 11 at the time of the television episode, dead as well. James had been a student at Kent University at the time of his murder, and he was studying accounting. There was no one else in the home at the time of the shootings. Timothy, the father, and the 2 oldest boys, Calvin and Charles, were not home at the time of the murders. I couldn't confirm this, but I believe Calvin and Charles were both living outside of the home by this time. It is immediately apparent that Jacob Stockdale has murdered his mother and his younger brother and has then turned the gun on himself in an attempt to end his own life. But he failed at that attempt. He is taken to the hospital where he undergoes emergency surgery, and he is then placed in intensive care to try and recover from the self-inflicted gunshot wound. Ultimately, Jacob survived.
Yesterday afternoon at about 4:36 p.m., our office received a 911 call from the residents. It was a landline call, not a cell phone call. It was a hang-up call. At that time, after we received the hang-up call, which we do in a number of cases on a daily basis, we responded deputies to the residents. Upon arrival at the residence, the deputies noticed that the front door was open. They gave verbal commands. There was no response. And at that time, there was a gunshot that went off. After the gunshot went off, they tactically approached the house when some backup arrived, and discovered that the suspect, Jacob Stockdale, had attempted suicide and shot himself when they arrived. They also discovered 2 victims in the home, 54-year-old Catherine Barbara Stockdale and 21-year-old James William Stockdale. Both were deceased as a result of a gunshot wound. Deputies continue to investigate the case along with the Stark County Coroner's Office. Once we have more information available on the case, we will provide it to you. Currently, the suspect, Jacob Stockdale, is in Cleveland Metro in critical care.
Any run-ins with Jacob prior to this incident? Maybe
No, ma'am.
Not related to the house?
None at all.
You haven't been there, no run-ins, anything? It seems like a really nice, wholesome family. What are you looking at from any motive yet at this point?
You know, it's hard to, kind of surmise what the motive may have been. There's some speculation. We don't really want to get into that part of it, but, we'll continue to investigate this case and try to determine if there's a motive. Just do not know.
Father indicate any issues that have been leading up to this?
None at all.
Mental health issues?
Never mentioned anything of that nature.
Had you guys been aware of this family? I know we're hearing a lot that they were performers, they would travel around a lot. Were they?
We're learning that as well.
Okay.
We were not aware of that when we responded. As was asked, we had never had a reason to be called to that residence in the past. So we don't have anything in our CAD or any information that we'd been there in the past. So.
A few days after the murders, Calvin Stockdale, the oldest of the boys, released a statement about his youngest brother, who is now deceased. He said, "James, our youngest brother, has always been a catalyst of family fun. He leaves behind many friends and a family that loved him dearly. My brother Jacob is still in critical condition, and we are praying for his physical recovery as our family makes funeral plans and begins the healing process." Timothy, the father, then released his own statement. He said, "Kathy has been my beloved wife of 32 years and a wonderful mother to our 4 sons. She loved nothing more than being a mother and grandmother. She had a strong love of learning and was passionate about her Christian faith, natural health, and organic farming." The Amish County Theater, where the Stockdale family band had played many times, issued a heartfelt statement that said, "The Stockdales are colleagues and friends, and our hearts go out to the family as we pray for peace and comfort in these extremely difficult times." The entire community was shocked to learn of the tragic and horrific crime that had been committed by a family member. The rest of the country was left to wonder and speculate as to why this happened. Had there been some type of incident that led to Jacob snapping? Had there been tensions in the home? Or was there perhaps a secret that he couldn't keep anymore? In the wake of it all, Laurie Tonkovic came forward and gave her opinion as to what she believed happened. She had spent 2 weeks living with this family in the home, and I think if anybody had a really good insight to give an opinion, it's Laurie. Laurie told the press that her own son had called her and told her there had been a shooting and murders at the Stockdale house, and Laurie says she never even asked who the shooter was, because she already knew. Laurie said she knew it was Jacob. She said there was always something dark and angry about him, and there was no question in her mind that if there had been a shooting with the family, it would have been Jacob that committed it. She then told the press basically the same thing she had said years ago. The boys were basically slaves. They weren't allowed any free time, that they were controlled and restricted to the extreme, and that they lived a somewhat joyless existence. I don't think people in those positions always know that their existence is joyless. They don't know any better. I didn't realize how joyless my life was at times until I changed my life dramatically and left religion. I wouldn't have told you that my life was joyless. And it wasn't joyless. I had children. I had things that brought me joy. Personally, I was missing out on a lot of things. But had you asked me that earlier in my life, I would have said I wasn't missing out on anything. And now I know differently. You don't know what you don't know. Laurie said she was not surprised that the anger became really intense towards Kathy because Kathy was so incredibly rigid and such a harsh disciplinarian. Laurie told TMZ, quote, When I switched the rules and I was going to let the boys have fun, let them have a television and video games and experience life a little bit, Jacob ran from the house crying. Laurie said she followed Jacob outside and asked why he was crying and what was wrong. And Jacob said, "My mom and dad say I'm going to burn in hell for doing the things you're going to let us do." Laurie said Jacob didn't want to burn in hell and was terrified. Oh, this is a little bit triggering for me. You know, there's just certain things that you're told when you're brought up in religion, and not even necessarily by the parents. My parents didn't tell me the things, it was other people. And they scar you. They do. If you aren't brought up in high demand religion, you don't get it. You never get over it. And I find it awful. I find it really, really hard to keep my mouth shut when I see people raising their kids the way that I was raised, because some of those kids are going to be fine and stay in the religion. And then some of those kids are going to go through what I went through. And it makes it really hard for me. Kids should never have to climb their way out of something they never agreed to be a part of in the first place. Laurie actually says, you know, I've always been told that God gives you free will, and these boys don't have any free will. They weren't allowed to make any choices. And she thinks that in the end, Jacob just couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Now, before we talk about what becomes of Jacob, let's talk a little bit about his life between his years as a 15-year-old on wife swap and his actions as a 25-year-old man. Jacob was a very accomplished musician. He was the fiddle player in the bluegrass band. And I'm going to tell you, from my position as a musician, they were a good bluegrass band. I like bluegrass music, and I've been exposed to my fair share in the day. I mean, I wouldn't say the Stockdale family band was Old Crow Medicine Show or Yonder Mountain String Band, both of which I've seen numerous times, but they were a good band. They were fun to watch. And Jacob was particularly outstanding. He won national fiddle competition awards, and he played with very prestigious orchestras. He was very talented. In 2012, he won the Ohio Grand Fiddle Championship. So that's a big deal. He also played the mandolin, the guitar, and other instruments, and he was good on all of them, but he really shined on the fiddle. Jacob also seems in the interviews to have a little bit of an ego, which is not an uncommon thing when someone is really good at something. And sometimes that ego, when it butts up against parents like he had, you know, that can be really dangerous. And then again, like Laurie says, there was a little bit of darkness in Jacob. You can kind of see it. Or can you? I'm always having to question myself if I'm thinking critically when looking at someone I know does a bad thing. Do I really see the darkness in them, or do I just know that they did a bad thing? I don't know. You'll have to decide for yourself. But that family band seemed to be his real escape. And what happened was the older boys got older, didn't want to do it so much anymore. They did still perform, and then Jacob and James began performing as a duo. So Jacob was even closer to his little brother James, which makes me even more confused as to why he would murder him. I found this image of just Jacob and James. I believe this is the album cover where they were performing as a duet. And think of all the time that they spent together, practicing and rehearsing, and then going on the road and performing. Really hard to wrap your mind around the fact that he would shoot this kid and kill him. As soon as Jacob was recovered, now with very clear and visible lasting injuries from his self-inflicted gunshot wound, he was charged with the murders of his mother and his brother. A grand jury heard the case and decided to take the death penalty off the table. Why? I'm not sure. I think they did have some sympathy for Jacob and the way that he was raised. And I'm going to be honest with you, if I was on a grand jury like that, and a kid killed his parents after being raised like that, I'm not sure I could put him to death either. It's like being raised in a cult, you know, that's hard for the kid. Jacob's attorneys immediately went to work trying to have him declared insane. And in the beginning, they were able to convince a judge that Jacob needed mental health treatment. And then he spent about a year in a mental health facility. And his time there was very, very eventful. November 2018. Jacob Stockdale is in the library inside the mental institution where he is being held. Jacob is a quiet kid and doesn't talk a lot, doesn't make himself known, so he's someone that might be easy to overlook. Well, one of the staff members realizes that they haven't seen Jacob for a while, and they begin to search for him, and the search goes on for quite some time. For a bit there, it looked as if Jacob might have escaped from the secure facility, and the staff was just about ready to hit the panic button, but then Jacob was found. He had squeezed himself between some tall stacks of books in the library, and he had been there hiding, completely quiet for hours. The staff and Jacob's doctors are convinced that he was waiting until the library closed so he could find a way to get out of the building. Pretty tough to make a case for insanity after something like that, but he wasn't done. A month later, there was another incident. Apparently, at this particular hospital where Jacob was housed, when groups of visitors come during the day, even some staff members, they are let out in a group so that all of the staff can monitor the doors opening and closing, and they don't have doors opening and closing just randomly throughout the day. Well, in December of 2018, Jacob very slickly tried to disguise himself as part of the group of people who were leaving the hospital. He stood in the middle of the group and then kept his head down as the group was released from the secure facility. And he's like just walking out, having every intention of leaving the building with the visitors. Fortunately, he was seen and taken back into custody. But both of these attempts, according to prosecutors, show a clear and concise intention to continue to commit criminal activity. And these actions also show a pattern of thinking in line with someone capable of making plans and rational decisions. The prosecution continued to ask the courts to reevaluate Jacob Stockdale's mental status so that he could be prosecuted. And by January 2019, the courts were ready to hear the matter.
Jacob, can you hear us here today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In this particular case, there's been a report that has been filed in this case, and just to walk through it by Dr. Archangela Woods, it's her opinion based on a reasonable psychological certainty that you are not suffering from a severe mental defect at this time of the charge, and she lists her reasons. She indicates it's her opinion beyond a reasonable psychological certainty that Mr. Stockdale was not suffering from a severe mental disease at the time charged. She's indicating that Mr. Stockdale, in her opinion, based on a reasonable psychological certainty, he was not suffering from a severe mental illness or disease or defect at the time of the offense charged. And an opinion regarding wrongfulness cannot be rendered because his defense is that he's asserting his innocence. So we have this report, we've done the competency, we've done several competency evaluations, we've now done the sanity evaluation. We have a trial scheduled for May 4th of this year. The defense, are you able, first of all, to get in to see your client okay?
Your Honor, we are not at this time able to get into Heartland. We are, however, able to have Zoom conferences with him, which we've been doing on basically a weekly basis.
As you heard in that clip, Jacob's attorneys were unsuccessful. A psychologist testified that Jacob was clinically sane when he committed the 2017 murders. The judge declared that Jacob Stockdale was competent to stand trial, and he informed the defense attorneys that preliminary hearings for a trial would be calendared. Both the prosecution and the defense accepted the findings of the psychological report. Jacob, then 28, had been at Heartland Behavioral Health Care in Massillon. It's a state-funded mental health hospital for the acutely mentally ill adults in Northeast Ohio. But he was then moved to Stark County Jail.
Having had a chance to review the previous report issued by Psychodiagnostic, I am also going to be filing the not guilty by reason of insanity plea and ask the court to order the appropriate evaluations for that plea also.
At the end of the trial, Jacob Stockdale was found guilty of 2 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. He is first eligible for parole in September of 2048, when he will be 56 years old. He went in at only 25, so he has, for all intents and purposes, lost his life due to his own actions. I found Jacob Stockdale very easily on an Ohio inmate search. He is housed at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Chillicothe, Ohio. I don't know that he will ever be released. I couldn't find information as to whether or not the surviving family members maintain a relationship with Jacob, but I did find Calvin and Charles on Facebook. Calvin is married and has some beautiful young children. I found this photo of he and Charles together. And then, like I said, I found Charles' Facebook and his TikTok, and it looks like he is still playing music, which is good to know. Charles also has some beautiful children. I hope the two older brothers and Timothy are coping as best they can, and that they are healing from this tragedy. Regardless of their lifestyle, this is just an absolutely horrific incident, and I don't know how people get over things like this. I really don't know how they go on. Two brothers that came from the same family, the same father and the same mother, are thriving and succeeding in life, bringing up children, and one is dead and the other is incarcerated for his murder and the murder of his own mother. How can one family turn out such vastly different children? How do two become husbands and fathers while one becomes a monster? We could ask this question over and over, ask it regarding every single true crime case we discuss here on this channel, and I don't think we will ever find a sufficient answer. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Hit the like button if you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can also join my Patreon. We have a big goal there, and it's this. We would like to start raising money for police departments who have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested because there's no money. We would like to pick a case, raise the money to get that kit tested, and hopefully solve the crime. The other thing that happens is we get that perpetrator's DNA in the system in case they are associated with other crimes. The kits cost between $500 and $750 a piece, and I think it's something we're gonna really hit hard after the first of the year. I want you to know that I appreciate your support more than I will ever be able to let you all know. I've had some rough moments on TikTok and here on YouTube in the last few weeks. A lot of you have seen my short. I've had occults kind of find my video and really kind of come after me. That's not going to change anything that I do here. They're just wasting their time. But you guys being supportive, it makes it so much more palatable and easier for me to deal with. And I'm not just saying that. I really truly mean your support and your kind words make it worth it and make me want to like get up and keep doing what I do. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want you guys to know how much the support means to me. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.